I think that aspiration makes for a much better source of motivation than shame, and that colors a lot of my way of thinking about discipline and self-development, and that influences some of the previous videos I have already posted. So in this video, I wanted to give it a bit more context on why I see things these ways and how it relates to my personal experience. When I was doing my video called Stop Saying Get Out of Your Comfort Zone last week, it got me thinking about some of these ideas. And funnily enough, I mean, like I already kind of knew all of the concepts I'm going to talk about, but it kind of put them into perspective. It kind of showed how it all linked together. That's kind of a funny thing that can happen sometimes. Well, you already had all the pieces, but somehow you only realize kind of how they fit together a lot of time later. I'm still thinking through these thoughts, and I'm sure I'll cover them in more depth and more specific points or components of it in future videos. But this is what was on my mind these last few days, so I thought I'd share already. Furthermore, it appears based on stats, I guess, on the like ratios that people seem to appreciate the videos where I have a bit more of a candid, open vibe, I guess, rather than when I'm a bit more ranty. And I guess it could help for a few people that are interested, give a bit more context on why I think the way I think and why I give the advice I give. So before I get into this whole topic of shame versus aspiration, I'd like to make sure to clarify why I do the things I do. What's my vision and objective, to make sure that that's clear, and it might help understand the rest. So my main objective is to maximize fulfillment and harmonious coexistence. And what I mean by that is that I want, as much as possible, every single individual to feel as fulfilled as they can, whilst while maintaining harmonious coexistence in between all these individuals. Without one person's fulfillment having to infringe upon another. But I don't think that personal fulfillment and harmonious coexistence are necessarily at odds. Actually, I think they kind of play into one another, because usually what feels meaningful to us usually ties into helping other people, or giving something of value to others in one way or another, whether it's direct or not. So that's what I'd like. Maximize fulfillment, maximize peace, and harmonious coexistence. The way I personally go about trying to help get to closer toward these objectives is through inquiry, trying to understand things, analyzing roadblocks, and finding solutions to get closer to that objective. So just kind of thinking about it, understanding it, and finding tools to work around it. And then the way that kind of manifests is mostly in two ways. The first way is simply expression, sharing what I believe to be important ideas. So I think like if more people were aware of these concepts or ways of thinking or frameworks, it would get us closer to these objectives. And then the second is more direct, and it's like helping other people that are similar to me, that is to say, indecisive, neurotic overthinkers who struggle to find a life direction and kind of commit and find something worth pursuing, to find a life direction and to optimize fulfillment and harmony within their own lives. And I think that the best way to do this is to find the answer that already exists within you, and that ties back into aspiration and our main topic for today. As far as I can tell, there's two main ways to guide your action, to kind of motivate why you do a specific thing, or to direct you in a specific direction. Now, I mean, there might be some more I haven't thought about, but for the moment, we'll just use this polarity. So you've got aspiration and shame. And you can think about it as pursuing good, so that's aspiration, versus running away from wrongness, which would be shame. I think this ties back into morality, but it's not just morality, right? It's the main impetus. I'm not sure how you pronounce that word, but the main source of motivation that's guiding your actions. So, as I said, basically, when you base your motivation on aspiration, you're trying to reach what you believe to be, the highest forms of goods, the most noble things you can think of, all the good related type of things we can think of. So that could be, beauty, worthiness, truth, all these types of good associated concepts. And whatever that means for you, because I think there's like a lot of variety in what, or in how people resonate to good. And the way we resonate with this general concept of goodness is through our intuitions and our emotions, and it's pretty subjective and different in between people. Although there's some overlap, of course, but there's also differences. This form of motivation is also pretty instinctive. Like, obviously, what you experience in your life and how you're raised in the culture and within you're educated will have an impact on how you perceive your aspirations, but it's pretty innate within you. Just kind of a form of drive that just will be there. On the other hand, shame-based motivation is more something that's learned, or at least that's my view on it. As we grow up, we're told that some ways we behave, some things we want to pursue are wrong. They're not the way they should be. And I mean, of course, I'm not saying that, any limits or parenting is bad, but, I think there's like a lot of superficial, unnecessary restrictions that are put within us. And so depending on your parents and depending on your circumstance, some people internalized a lot of this, kind of wrongness. It ends up affecting their self-worth. The way it manifests is you kind of feel like there's something wrong with you. You're not how you should be, and there's this external set of criterions for what is good, and that's what you should be like. And so you're always trying to escape yourself in order to be more like this external set of principles or goodness that you are not. And so that's why, you're always running away from wrongness, because that's kind of your natural state. And if you think about it, that's pretty tied to some of the religious and symbolical ways our culture tend to think. If you think about Christianity, for example, there's this whole idea of original sin, and we are born evil and we're bad, and we kind of have to do all these things to try and get better and escape from our innate wretchedness. So some things to note is that since when you're fueling your source of motivation or for why you want to do things through shame, you're following an external standard, right? So it's more of an extrinsic motivation, where you might have an intrinsic motivation to not be bad anymore, to feel good about yourself, but you're kind of following external standards. Whereas if you're aspiration fueled, then you're following internal standards, internal values of what seems right, which means that aspiration-based motivation is more sustainable over the long term because you yourself believe in what you're doing. It's more authentic. You don't have to just like strive against your natural self as much. Now it doesn't mean, just to be clear, aspiration it's something you're aspiring to be, right? It's not somewhere you already are. It doesn't mean you're perfect already, but just like the way you frame your actions and your growth is you're trying to go somewhere better. It's not really focusing on how inadequate you are right now, but you're pursuing, gradually something better, something worthy. Whereas when you're in the shame-based framework, you're more centered about how all the ways you're bad and trying to follow all these rules on how to be better. The aspiration source of motivation is more authentic, and it's also more fulfilling because it ties back into the fact that it's authentic. It feels right to you fundamentally in your values. It's aligned with what you really perceive to be best, which is most of the time not really the case with shame-based motivation. Now, you might have some overlap. You might agree with some of the external standards that have been given to you, but still, there's more friction naturally in between the drives you're pursuing and your natural feelings or perception of goodness, we'll say. On top of affecting just like your personal experience of pursuing these objectives, it also affects the people you interact with. It ties back to this idea of authenticity, of being genuine. And there's this idea that Marshall Rosenberg, the person who invented the nonviolent communication framework, talked about. I don't know if he invented it, but that's where I heard it from, that he calls natural giving, and he defined it this way. Well, at least he defines it in part this way. My giving isn't done to put you in my debt, but because I want to live the love I feel for you. So there's this genuineness that you really feel that what you're doing, you believe in it. You believe in the goodness of the thing you're pursuing. You can draw a connection to this idea with enthusiastic consent. And so kind of to give an idea, right? An example, Imagine you've got two people who are baking cookies, okay? The first one is really motivated, they're passionate about it, it's their joy in life is to bake cookies and have other people eat them. And then you have a second person who's enslaved and they have to bake cookies, otherwise they're beaten. But they make technically, a bit, their cookies are a bit better than the joyous person, right? If you've got to choose and pick to eat some cookies from one or the other, which one do you feel most at ease? Which one would inspire you the most to eat your cookies? I'm going to assume that it would probably be the joyous person rather than the enslaved person. And and I think part of that is because you can kind of feel it in the vibe, right? It's just kind of wrong to engage or take benefits from someone who doesn't want to do what they're doing, right? There's like some kind of unpleasantness in there. I think that's the benefit of aspiration-based motivation, is that you want people, I mean, you want yourself, but the people with who you collaborate and whose work you benefit from to be impelled rather than compelled, right? So the impulse, the impetus comes from themselves. They want to do it. They're not forced to do it by someone else or something else. I think there's two main ways that, at least that I can think of now, that shame-based motivation materializes, like kind of two different forms it takes. I call the first one egotistical abnegation. This refers to acting in a self-sacrificial way, but not really because you believe that what you're doing is virtuous, is a good thing to do, but rather because it feeds into a self-image. You want to feel like you're being a good person. I think this is pretty prevalent, more than you'd think, and I'm not a big fan of it. This ties back to the video I made on the paradox of selflessness versus selfishness. And yeah, I think a lot of people kind of get in this trap where they do what they perceive to be good, not because they actually necessarily personally agree with it, but they just got this sense that it's what they're supposed to be doing, so they do it even though they don't really feel like doing it, and it builds up resentment. It's disingenuous, and as I said, there's like a wrong vibe about it, so I'm not a big fan, and I'll probably talk about it more in the future. The second way this impetus of shame manifests is what I would call, at least for the moment, the myth of redemptive suffering. I talked about that in my last video, the one called Stop Saying Get Out of Your Comfort Zone. This refers to the general stance or this general approach to life where a lot of people seem to think that it's basically good. It makes you a good person to suffer. And I think more specifically, it kind of redeems you from your unworthiness and your internal evil to suffer perpetually, to toil and to go through tribulation and to face adversity. And that's pretty pervasive, I think, in a lot of talk around discipline in general, and to an extent also personal development. And that's part of why I dislike the expression "get out of your comfort zone," because I think it's steeped in part in this general way of thinking. Now, that's not to say that I don't believe you need to be able to face adversity and to push through discomfort from time to time. I think sometimes it's necessary. But I think that the virtuous part for me about that is that you're trying to achieve your aspiration, right? You're trying to move towards your aspiration, not because you feel like you have to, or you're trying to redeem yourself for being fundamentally flawed. Now, I don't think a lot of people that have this behavior, like that's actually what they're consciously thinking. But I think it's kind of a subconscious motivation, at least in part. Now, some people might be part of their authentic aspiration might be to have this kind of striver mindset of pushing through adversity again and again. I can think maybe of Stephen Pressfield, and if that's your case, that's fine. I'm not saying you should stop that if that feels aligned and that's what gets you going. Good for you. But what I'd say is, if you can try and avoid pushing it on people for who that is not the case, then that'd be even better. Again, I think this idea of redemptive suffering, I mean, you can find ties back to some of our religious vision, so again, the original sin, and even some of, if I remember correctly in the Bible, the fact that women suffer during childbirth is like a punishment for original sin. So I think this kind of framework, this way of seeing things, is actually pretty imbued in most cultures. I don't actually think that if I have to try and find the origin for this, I don't think it's actually religion. I think it's even older than that. And if you'd like to learn more about this, I'd recommend reading the book Ishmael by Daniel Quinn. And he's got a series of books, so you can read if you like the first one, then keep reading them. Anyways, as I said in my previous video on the comfort zone, I, I don't I personally don't think that suffering for no reason, or just the act of suffering, is virtuous in itself. I think it's better if you can avoid it. If it's not necessary, then I think it's better to not engage at all. If you don't have to, when possible, I'd rather go for a more harmonious, peaceful, smooth process of work, of whatever. I feel pretty strongly about this topic because I myself have been confronted with the pull between shame-based motivation and aspiration-based motivation. And I think that shame-based motivation is pretty harmful in several ways, in forcing people to do things they don't want to do, but also in blocking people from doing what they would truly want to do, and making it harder for them to know what that is. I think that part of this whole shame-based system, this motivation of shame, is that there's this pervasive idea that there is this one right way to live. There is one way to do good, and all the rest is bad. Now, I mean, there's a little bit more leeway technically in the way we usually function in society, but we tend to be pretty restrictive on what is good, what we deem to be worthwhile, or the way to do things. And this also ties back to Ishmael, if you want to explore more how this came to be, or at least one theory on how this came to be. So if what you would really want to do, what you'd feel impelled to do through your aspiration, it doesn't really fit neatly into the kind of predetermined paths that have been set by society, there is this mismatch that happens where you start forming beliefs that basically your natural way of wanting to do things, what you're naturally drawn to, is wrong. So you kind of stop listening to it, you kind of put it to the side, and then you try to fit in the pre-made patterns and the pre-made passes and archetypes that have been given to you by society. But even if they're not a good match, I mean, I'm saying society, but it's like a lot of different people. It could be your family, and it kind of, there's like a complicated interplay of influences. But I think that definitely has been the case in my life. When I was a teenager, felt pretty depressed and hopeless because basically I could see that the path that I had been made to understand to be the right one didn't fit me, right? Like I wasn't going to manage to do it the one right way to do it. And so I was pretty screwed. And as I was just kind of going through the motions, but I felt like, okay, I'm like, it's not going to work for me. And that was pretty scary and depressing. And I think that's one of the reasons why people, and if you're in a similar case to me, struggle to find a sustainable life direction and what they really want to do, because you've kind of been trained over time and you don't even remember it. And people who, and the training wasn't even completely intentional, but you kind of, there's like a lot of internal signals you get about what really matters to you that are kind of buried because you don't really trust them. You think they're bad, they're wrong, and you're supposed to be following this other set of values and things to pursue. So this shame complex kind of creates a layer of interference with your aspiration and what you really feel drawn to. Now it's not perfect, thankfully. You can still are still some strong feelings of resonance. So it could be being very touched or being very triggered. These are good signals that you really care about something. But it does obstruct it. It makes it harder to dig inside the answers that already exist within you. When you finally find some bits and pieces of your aspiration, of what you really feel drawn to, and also when you start considering passes, different ways, different strategies to get to success, whatever way you interpret that to mean, but probably it will probably be more satisfying if it's the way you perceive it rather than one that's been given to you firstly. That's very liberating, and I'll probably talk about that more in depth later. But yeah, because now you actually have a path, a way, a methodology that can actually work for you the way you are naturally. So yeah, on my end, what kind of freed me from this, general hopelessness and feeling of dread, it was a couple of things, right? But I think one part of it was finally seeing different archetypes, different ways, different types of personalities, different types of ways you can interact, navigate the world, and best practices for all these different archetypes. So part of this was personality typology, and that's one big benefit I think they have. It's not even whether it's perfectly accurate, but just showing you diversity and different ways to pursue your objectives. I think that's very valuable. So, you can see, oh, this archetype or this path I was given, it's not really a good match for me. But then there's like a lot of other ones, and this one feels like it might, work better. So that was one part of it. In my case, though, the really most impactful thing that helped me change my outlook and give me hope was three pieces of art. So you have the anime Gurren Lagann, the stage play Cyrano de Bergerac, and another anime called Ping Pong the Animation. So I think they're all great, and part of what part of the reason I resonated so much with them, and I still do, is because they are basically an embodiment of this idea of aspiration-based motivation. The protagonist in all of these stories, be it Camina and Simon in Gurren Lagann, Cyrano and Cyrano, and the hero in Ping Pong, are all very self-motivated people, right? They have this strong vision of what is good, what should be pursued, what is virtuous, and they follow it drastically. They're very most of the people around them find them at least half crazy and weird, but they also have this sense of respect for them because they're so bravely authentic. They pursue their own goals. I probably couldn't have put it into words when I first discovered those, but I think a big help they gave me was kind of giving me this, at least on a subconscious level or on an intuitive level, this embodiment, this example of aspiration-based motivation, of doing things because you feel like they're worthy and because you feel fulfilled and authentic when you're doing them, rather than because some external source told you that you had to do it or else bad things are going to happen. Resonance is very subjective, so I don't know if it would have the same effect on someone else. You're free, and I would recommend you try and watch/read all of these because I think they're incredible, of course. But maybe it won't do the trick for you. I wouldn't have recommended Cyrano de Bergerac if you couldn't read French, but actually I found a translation that seems to be actually pretty good, so it might be fine. I'll link it in the description. But anyway, for me, it was very transformative to switch from the shame-based mindset motivation to aspiration-based. It really opened up new possibilities. It gave me hope, and something good enough to try and keep trying, keep striving towards something worthy. At that point in time, I still didn't know exactly what that was, but I had hope that there was something worse at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. And I think that can be the case for other people. I personally think that using shame as the main fuel for your motivation and your sense of morality is deeply unsatisfactory. It's a pretty miserable experience. You can do it. It's less sustainable. It'll take more of a toll on you because you don't completely buy into it, but you can do it. But I would strongly recommend moving towards aspiration instead. And yeah, that's a pretty strong belief I have. And most of the advice and techniques and methods that I've thought about and that I've figured out along the way and I'll share with you are based with this fundamental basis. Part of my personal sense of aspiration, my values is I like ease, I like peacefulness, I like serenity. I don't like needless strife if I can avoid it. I mean, if I have to, okay, sure. But so part of the systems and approaches I recommend are based on trying to minimize unnecessary friction as much as possible. And as I mentioned at the beginning, to maximize for fulfillment and harmony. One example of this would be my video on befriending resistance instead of fighting it, that was inspired strongly by the internal family system model. So if you're interested, you can watch it. So I hope this could maybe shed a bit more light on why I have the approach I have and my stance towards motivation and personal development and discipline. And if you like it, if you kind of think that you're pretty well aligned with it, then there'll be more videos and posts to come on these types of topics. I'm also interested in any technique that you may have developed yourself. I'd be interested to meet more people that resonate with this way of thinking and to build together tools and approaches and strategies that work well to get us closer to this general ideal. In any case, thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.